Hey folks, your OS Reviews. You're watching our video first look and a quick review of a Kocaso Android netbook today. This is the NB1016 series and it has a 10-inch display. Sells on Amazon for about 80 to 90 bucks, so it isn't too expensive. But then again, Kocaso is more of a drugstore name that you'll find in places like Rite Aid or Walgreens, for instance, when shopping around. Otherwise, they also offer this in a 13-inch variant, which is slightly updated. This one's actually been on the market for a few years now. Runs on a slightly more outdated Android 4.0 operating system, has been updated to Android 4.2, but the 13-inch version sells for a bit more and has Android 4.4 KitKat installed. In terms of specifications, we are talking about 1 gig of DDR3 RAM, and what is interesting about this is the processor. It actually is using a VIA A4 chip, which is a 1.2 GHz processor, but again, it's using VIA as opposed to, let's say, ARM, which has recently been acquired by Docomo. So it's kind of interesting that they went for this specific processor chip. It's not as common on a lot of our mobile devices and also tablets and smartphones in general. Now, this isn't the first time that we've actually seen an Android netbook. We weren't too ecstatic when we first saw a Craig 7-inch netbook a few years back, just because although performance is decent, for about the same money you can pick up a tablet. And I really still think that Android is meant to be used as a tablet or as a phone. With a touchscreen display, it's a lot more intuitive, a lot more easier to go through, and you can always pick up a Bluetooth keyboard and use it as a pseudo netbook for productivity and work, whereas this really limits you in the sense you can't actually interact with the screen. Otherwise, this one also comes in 2 color iterations. This is a glossy black version, also comes in a white model as well, and you can see there, as far as the 10-inch netbooks go, this one is pretty lightweight as well as slim, and for an Android netbook, it does look fairly classy and elegant. Although it's not the lightest thing on the world, it almost weighs about 2 pounds. On the front here, you have access to the company's logo. It is a fingerprint as well as a scratch and glare magnet on the front as well. And on the sides here, you have access to a full-sized SD card, which is quite useful for transferring files as well as pictures you might take with a digital camera. There's also an array of LED lights for the power status as well as for charging. And the other side features access to the proprietary charging port. It takes about 3 hours to completely charge the battery on here. And afterwards, I could use this for about 5 to 6 hours before I needed to recharge it again. So decent as far as netbook specs are concerned, or I should say ultra portable specs. There's also 2 full-size USB 2.0 ports for plugging in thumb drives and accessories. There's also a micro HDMI port, as well as 3.5mm headphone jacks, microphone ports, and an Ethernet port for wired internet if you don't want to use the Wi-Fi on board. There's also a connection to Bluetooth and a GPS. The back features the hinge, which has been positioned on 2 sides, so pretty stable. It doesn't creak or cringe, even though it is made out of plastic. And the back also features 4 rubber feet, which prevents the netbook from sliding around on the surface or a desk. And there's also a ventilation grill. This is an Android netbook, so it actually doesn't feature any moving fans, so it remains fairly cool during operation. It doesn't overheat or anything, so there are no sounds in the background, unlike a Windows netbook, for instance. Opening up the netbook, you'll notice how the weight here isn't distributed as nicely as we would have liked. In fact, it's a very top-heavy netbook. Part of this reason is because all the processing power of the memory, there's a 4 or 8 gigabytes of flash storage on board, which is again further expandable, is all located on the top with the screen, so it's almost like a tablet, of course without that touchscreen functionality, whereas the base just features that hollow keyboard, so it's really empty, and as a result it's quite lightweight. And the problem is if you have it at an angle that, kind of goes beyond 90 degrees, where if you're typing, let's say, on your lap, or if you have this position on a lower desk and you want to, technically the hinge itself is capable of going all the way back, but you can see here that it's going to wobble and fall back, which obviously isn't the most stable thing, nor the most convenient thing in the world. Otherwise, taking a closer look at the layout here, this is a 10-inch netbook, so you don't have access to the most generously sized keyboard. It's not full size, but at the same time, it's leaps and bounds better than the Craig keyboard that we had on that other Android netbook, just because, again, you just have larger keys, they're more tactile, they have more travel, they're more responsive, and all in all, after using this for about 10 to 15 minutes, I really got used to the layout and made very few minimal errors just due to the typing and the layout in general. What's kind of interesting here is that there's actually a Windows key icon, despite the fact that this is running on Android, which leads me to suspect that Kocaso, first of all, probably ordered this as a generic product out of Shenzhen, China, and secondly, there might be other iterations floating around on the internet, maybe be running on Windows CE, which by the way is a horrible operating system here in 2016, or perhaps even Windows 7 or Windows 8. That might be interesting to see. There's also access to dedicated controls for arrow keys and a top row for function keys, a very standard layout as far as netbooks and even computers are concerned. Otherwise, although the overall build and finish here is pretty premium for the price point and fair, it has this matte finish which doesn't really attract too many fingerprints. I don't like how the trackpad here is extremely small, especially for a modern netbook. I kind of expect this to be larger. It's the only point of interaction with the UI unless you want to plug in a optical mouse, so it makes using the cursor and clicking on things a little bit more tough, although you do have dedicated left and right click keys which are quite tactile and responsive. Again, I do think this could be slightly larger. It supports a few gestures, but it's not as easy to do things like pinch and zoom just because of this limited size of the touchpad. It still is a little bit jumpy, which I think is a common thread with a lot of these Android netbooks, since it is meant to be used as a touchscreen product. When you place it as this typical kind of more of a work-oriented perspective with this netbook trackpad, it becomes a bit more difficult to use, and we'll show you that later on when we power things on and go through the UI. But for now, this is what it looks like. The hinge here feels pretty stable. Again, we have access to the screen, which is a glossy screen, so it does reflect a bit more light, unfortunately, under the sun, so not the best in terms of reading text if you are in a brighter environment, but it does have decent viewing angles. It's an IPS panel, and on the very top there's access to a 1.3 megapixel webcam as well for Skype calls and for video conferencing apps. So a pretty standard design as far as netbooks computers are concerned, and all in all fairly attractive despite, again, that weight distribution issue. So next we're going to power this thing on and show you guys how the UI as well as the skin that Kocaso has made looks like.